Taylor Swift is a link builder. There were rumors that she would get engaged. Our client said, let's give them a free wedding venue. And then we got them 50 links. That's digital PR.
Wix Studio, one end-to-end web creation platform for your agency to deliver exceptional work with absolute efficiency.
Managing multiple clients or large websites? Automate your SEO with Ali AI. Start your free trial now.
Hello everyone! Full room, yay! I finally made it to the main stage, whoever. Okay, so let's start, because I have 120 slides and the counter has started. So everyone that has seen my lectures, you know what you're up for. So who here has time? I mean, I don't, obviously, 20 minutes, but still. Do you have time to do like a full-blown content audit every month, or 6 months, or for 10 agency clients, or whenever someone decides that it's time to do a blog content audit, even though you did one last month and they didn't implement anything, but just because Google did an update, it's time to do one again. I remember this, and I didn't have time for this, and I hated this. So typically when you do an audit, you organize your database, you crawl, you do content, you pull metrics, then you understand the data, you categorize your inventory, then you might evaluate the performance and assign something to be done, which typically doesn't get done, but still you do it. And then you organize a deliverable and ideally build a prioritized list of recommendations for people to execute. So today, we're going to go through the same steps of this process, but we are going to try to build better systems that are going to serve us in the long term. So we're going to implement machine learning APIs whenever we can in order to get better insights for what we want to do. And we're also going to automate the process. So I did clickbait you, all of your people in the room. We're not going to fully automate the process, like at the end of the presentation. We're not going to have like a one-click system and you get a blog content audit. I wish I could do that for you, but I can't. But we are going to try to build a better audit, and we're going to try to do that quicker. So we're going to go through the same steps, starting with organizing your database. You need to crawl, you need to get the content, you need to get associated metrics with that content. How do we do that? The goals at this stage are extremely simple. You need accuracy, consistency, and you need thoroughness in the way that you collect this data and bring it together in your database, whatever the platform you choose. So in terms of crawling and scraping content, why would you need to reinvent the wheel here? There is a ton of tools that you can use. For a normal site, something like Screaming Frog can also crawl and also scrape any content piece or the entire content of the page that you want. So use that. You can pair it with Google Analytics, you can pair it with Search Console, pop it in Google Sheets, you're done. If you're working with a site that has over 500,000 pages, you would need a little bit of more complex solutions. Screaming Frog would need to be set up differently, connected to a database, not working on your laptop, of course. You would need a scraping API, but still the process is quite similar. I recommend Jess Beck's presentation from a couple of years back on how to build your own crawler, especially if you're working with a multi-million page website. When it comes to mapping important performance metrics, from Google Analytics, you need user engagement data, things like bounce rate, average session duration, just to know, are people engaging with this page or not? You need traffic data, of course, but you also need to build a little bit more custom metrics when it comes to that kind of data, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you need data from Search Console, search traffic data on Discover News, whatever it works for your content. We can go a step further here, and we can get internal links data as well to see whether if this page is valuable, is it internally linked, is it backlinks from other websites, and also content readability scores. From Screaming Frog, you can get things like the word count, how complexly written the content is, and things like that, which are all extremely helpful whenever you're assessing the performance of the content, because these are actually things that Google assesses as well. And a step even further, build your own custom metrics. Don't rely on just the metrics that everyone else is going to be doing, especially if you're working in an agency. So here, shout out to Marco Giordano, if I'm pronouncing his surname right. I'm so sorry if I'm not. But build things like content decay scores, build things like zero-click pages, identify all of these things so that you know what to prioritize at the end, especially if it's something that's highly important for your brand. Okay, put the data together. You can do this in Google Sheets, most likely, BigQuery for the pros, or if you're working with a big website. But less likely, what I have seen, people don't really use Looker Studio here, but actually if you build your spreadsheet in a way to visualize in Looker Studio, you actually have a template that you can reuse a month from now when your client asks you to do another blog content audit. And you can see actually there's no change because you didn't implement anything that I said, so easy peasy. In order to do that, you need to learn a little bit about joins, but that's a topic for another day. So let's understand the data. Here is where the fun starts. We need to categorize our inventory, and the goals here are to label as much as possible from all of the components that Google cares about, and we, as people that make the web better, should also care about. And we also need to see what works. We also need to see where we fail with the content. So let's start with the basics, site structure and authorship. I'm not going to spend too much time here because Jonathan already did a really good presentation on this, but essentially you need to tag things like what is the theme, what is the page template, what is the site section. You can get this from the URL, but if you're working with a website that doesn't really have a good URL structure, we'll talk about an alternative later. You need to tag who the author is, how frequently the content has been updated, when it's been published, and how frequently it needs to be updated as well. You can tag most of these things with Screaming Frog. For more complex websites, when you don't have any of these things available to you in the URL or the title, you can also use something like AutoML, which allows you to upload images of your site, and then it detects the different elements that you can later scrape, which is very useful. Then we need to do things like intent. So you need to target intent and how frequently the content needs to be updated. Here, I suggest using a rule-based classification approach to map out the target intent, to map out the persona, and also to update the content freshness. How frequently do you need to go back to this content and update it? So you can create a very rudimentary custom target intent categories for titles, like if it has this word, then it is informational, or something like that. But even better is if you classify the ranked queries from Search Console, because what you might see is actually 90% of the queries that this article is ranking for are categorized as informational, but the article is actually not an article, it's a landing page, and it doesn't really have that much content. So maybe we should turn it into an article and make the landing page a little bit more bottom of the funnel, if that makes sense. So you need to actually work constantly with the classification labels that you have and customize them based on whatever website and industry you're working with in order to make them a little bit better. And the best thing for the pros out there is if you can train a classifier on your niche's content and queries. So let's look at a case study here from Mark, who has 100 million rows of query data, and he wants to train a classifier on this data. The best thing to do here might be to go to AutoML, natural language processing, and train a classifier. Good thing for you, you can do it not only with AutoML, you can also do that with Vertex AI. The code is available and extremely easy to use on Google Cloud. So here, final thing on search intent, incorporate signals from SERP features. If you already have a SERP analysis done and you can see most of the SERP features are informational, the article is most likely going to also be informational if it's ranking there. Incorporate user knowledge levels. So for instance, if your article's title is Beginner's Guide to Something Something, then you obviously know this is an article for beginners, right? And also pinpoint the user action that you want the user to take. So is it something to sign up to a newsletter? Is it to buy a product, and so forth? Constantly experiment with these tags and labels. Okay, so content topics and subtopics. How many of you are actually doing something to understand what the content is about whenever you're auditing a blog? So the easiest thing that you can do is classification and clustering when it comes to the machine learning world. We're going to learn how to do both of them, and both of them are extremely easy to execute. The difference between the two: classification sorts your data set, and when I say data set, this is the entire content of the website that you have, into predetermined categories. So imagine that somewhere you'll see Google has a list with their API of 1,300 categories, and you have your content and you want to see, does it fit into either of these categories? Clustering, on the other hand, you have your content and you need it to be partitioned, but you know it doesn't fit into either of these categories, or you need labels that are a little bit more specific. Like, for instance, you're working in blockchain or cyber or medical or whatever else it is. So you need it to label your data set with unique labels. That's the main difference between the two. Super easy stuff. So for classification, we're going to use Google's natural language API. Like I said, it has a bunch of categories. The process is not going to take you more than 20 minutes to execute, I promise. I have tested it. I've worked with people that are complete beginners. It is actually less than 20 minutes. You enter your URLs and your content, you run the script with a formula, and you get labels. But not only do you get one label, you actually get a template that you can play with, and you can visualize a primary category. Think something like news or blog post or anything. Then you get a secondary category. So for instance, for news, it could be things like politics or entertainment. And then you get a tertiary category. So for instance, if it's entertainment, is it about people? Or I'm not going to give examples with like politics, because we don't want to get into that now. But essentially, you get like a really good understanding of what your content is about. The categories are predictable, which means it's really, really good to work with something like that when you're presenting this data to clients. And you can also benchmark the performance of the model by using the accuracy indicated score, because this actually allows you as a consultant, because you have a fully functional, thinking, amazing brain, to say, oh, this accuracy indicated is 60%, but actually my threshold for what I consider a good label is at 85%. So I'm not going to use this category and I'm not going to present it to my client. I'm actually going to use only the ones that the model tells me are above 90%, for instance. You can get that with ChatGPT, and don't try, please don't try. Don't. Because ChatGPT will just say, okay, this is a category, I think, and it will just generate something. I think, me being ChatGPT. And it's just going to generate a random number, and that random number means nothing. So that's why it's good to use dedicated APIs that actually are trained to do this kind of job. So then we need to actually go a step further into clustering to identify subtopics and to tag the content with the subtopics as well. Here you can use something like LDA. The way LDA works is essentially it takes a collection of documents, think the content on your website, and it processes it in order to understand not only the main topics of your website, but also the topics within a given document and how they're interconnected with one another. Extremely useful stuff. It basically gives you all of the documents that mention a certain topic and also all of the topics mentioned in a document. And it allows you to view the main keywords that actually define this particular subtopic. So Bartopic is another great alternative. It's a lot more new. LDA, for instance, has been created in 2010s or something like that, and Bartopic is quite recent and created by a marketer as well. So what it allows you to do is actually mix and match different machine learning models, and for every step of how you perform the topic modeling, you can pick the right machine learning approach that you wanted to use. So this might sound a little bit like expert and advanced for a lot of people here, but if you have already built topic clustering with LDA, you will know how valuable it is to kind of pinpoint and choose different things that you can do to make your topic clusters better. But it essentially does the same thing like LDA does. At the end, you have your subtopics, and you also have things like what is the main word for each topic, and you also have the hierarchy of topics that exist in a given document and in your collection. I have a video on how to do the first approach, LDA topic modeling. As you can see, it's less than 10 minutes to execute, so just saying. And it's also very useful and good to experiment with Bartopic as well. Like I said, it's very accessible because you have Google Colab template and you just need to replace it with your data. In both cases, you need to feed the data back into your audit spreadsheet, and then you can move on to entities. Fun. Why do you need to do entities? Because you now have the topics, so you can say, okay, this article is about news, it's about politics, but what about it? Is it in England? Does it mention Boris Johnson? I don't know who else to mention to make you really angry. But yeah, essentially, what exactly does it mention? People, places, concepts, and things like that. You need to know that for your content. We're going to use the same API, processes again, no more than 20 minutes, pop your content into the Google Sheets slide, run the formula, and you get things like what kind of entity it is it mentioned in a positive or in a negative sentiment, how is it mentioned, the different types of wordings that people have used whenever they have written about this entity, how prominent is it for your entire content collection. This is extremely useful data for you to know exactly how you are writing about the content. And just opening a quick note here, imagine if you compare and contrast this with how your competitors are writing about the content, you might find that this is a much better way to do auditing of content as opposed to the traditional way. So what we need to do here is map it to the topics, map it to the classification labels that we have to actually see what entities are spoken about in each topic and how that differs from our competitors, for instance. When it comes to EEAT, Aleda has an amazing checklist of how we can audit this based on the guidelines that Google has already published for us. So with a bit of creativity, you can actually automate some of the checks. So if you think about how many different topics is the content writing about, is it too many? Well, we already have the number of content topics. We actually have the topic models because we did that step. So we should have the number of topics as well. So once you audit like 2 or 3 websites, you should know, is it too little, is it too many, and so forth. So you can answer this question even though it seems quite complex. Does the content leave readers with the feeling they need to search again? Well, easy. Do they bounce a lot? How much time do they actually spend on the page? Is it self-evident who authored the content? Easy. Do you have an author byline? You can get that from Screaming Frog by analyzing the page. Do the bylines lead to author pages? Easy. Do you actually have author pages? So most of these actually can be automated. There's only a few that are very difficult to check at scale. So imagine if you can actually incorporate Google's guidelines into the way that you do content auditing. This will definitely create a better outcome for the audit as well. When it comes to semantics, there's just a few things that you need to understand. Semantics is all about how organized you are. So instead of having an unorganized website, do you refer to things in the same way? Are you thorough with the way that you have tagged, categorized, and presented the topics that you talk about on your website? That's the first thing. The second thing is, instead of copying what other people have written, the way that the articles have been written, the same 10 tips for ChatGPT everywhere, because everyone wants to write content about AI, actually, do you present new information to the search landscape? So think about how unique the information that you're presenting is. Is it the presentation method that's unique? Is it actually the depth of the information and so forth? And instead of focusing on keywords, semantics actually pushes you to focus on the user experience. Think about what they're searching for first, what they're searching for next. What is their user journey? What platforms are they on? What topics are they interested in just because they searched this particular thing? So related searches as well. And entities, topics, and all of the stuff that we just mentioned. There's a few creators in the space that I can recommend. There's a content audit roadmap that I've linked to here that I think is quite useful for beginners. But here you can also build metrics like keyword density, topical relevance, and also query content match. So for query content match, I'm sorry, my screen died, but it's fine. So for query content match, we're going to talk about keyword. So keyword essentially is very similar to keyword topic, and it actually allows you to see what the main keyword is for the content that you're analyzing. So for instance, if you're analyzing a paragraph or a keyword, what is the main term within that? That is the most important for your users. So for instance, and this is just an extraction from the script that you might run to execute, but you can also incorporate it via app script directly into your spreadsheet to give you the main term of the title, the main term of the content, and so on. So it will actually highlight how dense your content is with terms and whether those terms are actually relevant to your business case and the content that you're writing. So this is extremely useful. Okay, 2 more steps. You're now at a stage where you need to evaluate performance and assign action items in order to actually improve what you're seeing. The goal at this stage is to build a simple and adaptable system because you will be reusing it for the same client, for clients in different industry and so forth. You need to have consistent evaluation criteria. You can't evaluate one site with the criteria of the other. You need to have the same website evaluated with criteria that you evaluate other websites as well. Because essentially, I mean, if you don't count Forbes, that's kind of how Google does it. And then you need to have a forward-looking approach whenever you're doing performance evaluations. Who's going to be next? Who's going to be actioning and implementing what you do? So if-else logic is your best friend at this stage. Here you need to build a checklist with best practices for all of the different components that you assessed. We're talking about content readability, titles, meta descriptions, so forth. My checklist, this one, is actually 500 or so rows long, just to actually say, if this falls into this and this range, that's not good. So whenever you do a blog content audit, it immediately flashes everything in like green, yellow, or whatever. And then you need to actually translate this checklist into if-else statements. So if it is, a short title, what do you need to do to fix it? Where do you need to go in order to understand how to fix it? And then once you have these if-else statements, you can do AppScript integration into Google Sheets. You can also do that in Python if you're working with BigQuery. And each assessment then should have a corresponding action item and a person that should be responsible for implementing it. And Looker Studio dashboards can be a great way to build those if-else statements if you are not comfortable with coding as well. You can also set up Zapier integrations to automatically alert you whenever some of those components have fallen. Kind of like if titles are too low, do this and that. And then finally, you build a prioritized list of recommendations. Yay. A good audit, to me, is immediately actionable. It's extremely thorough. It's done once, and then once you fix everything, you're golden. It evokes FOMO, it promotes action, and so forth. I am a geek, and that's what I want to see. But you're not auditing for me. You're probably auditing for someone that's extremely busy and doesn't really want to read an 80-page document. So ask your client what they want to see at the end. But if you do have to write an audit for someone like me, and you have to write them consistently, like you're an agency and you need to justify why you're charging $20,000 for an audit, for instance, you need to actually have a template that goes through the main components that actually give context about the recommendations. So explaining different metrics, explaining different checks and so forth. And then you only have a pattern that is unique to the analysis that you have conducted for that client, for instance. And this is content patterns are concept that is borrowed from programmatic SEO, so extremely useful to know. But essentially, you connect your Google Doc with AppScript and with Google Sheets, and you can actually make this step a little bit easier whenever you are building the deliverable instead of writing it from scratch every time. And you can also set up that integration with Zapier as well. So final note, I know I'm over time, but how often do you do these content audits? Imagine if every time you can get your system to be a little bit better, you can reduce some of the complexity, you can reuse the most successful components, and you can actually build a better system that's like 1% better every time. I'm not with the expectation that you're going to go away and you're going to build all of this within your next audit, but if you just try to improve taking some of these concepts, it will definitely be better. And just to say, you can also include things like SERP analysis, rank analysis, all of the stuff to make it even better. So 20 minutes for a talk on machine learning is always a challenge, and we're just scratching the surface here. So if you want to learn more, go to ML for SEO. There is a ton of experts that I have invited to contribute, and I'm writing content there myself. There will be an academy and templates and all of the things to get you started with everything we've talked about in this presentation. And if you want to find me on the slides, you can do so here. And thank you so much for listening.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.